Brand new season, brand new dawn for Box. And it's lights out and away we go.
Simply lovely.
Obviously enjoying that last hit.
Let's go! Yeah, baby!
Hey guys, welcome back to Box, where this week we are talking round 2 of the 2024 Formula 1 Championship, Saudi Arabia. So let's get into it. As predicted, Red Bull had a very straightforward weekend. On track. Off track, the drama and the speculation just keeps coming. But that's a wrap up for a different day. For the first time ever, Max took pole in the streets of Jeddah, beating out his teammate once again. Second time in a row. We're only 2 races in. Who qualified behind him in P3, despite having qualified on pole in previous years. But nevertheless, it is what it is. The race could not have been more straightforward for the duo, with the pace of that Red Bull putting them well and truly above the rest and helping them secure yet another 1-2 and securing themselves a commanding lead in the both championships. Their dominance didn't just occur in qualifying in the race though, with both drivers finishing in the top 5 in every session across the weekend. The lowest that Max got was P3 in free practice 2. P3. Checo, the lowest that he got was P5 in free practice 2. So I'm going to go out on a limb here and say it has everything to do with their run plan. So as much as we'd like to think that the Red Bull dominance may go away, or the thought that maybe it wouldn't be straightforward for them this season. Yeah. Anyway, let's move on to Ferrari, shall we? Unfortunately, Carlos Hot Chili Pepper Sainz was not well enough to drive, and after competing in free practice 1 and 2 on Thursday, Carlos followed in the footsteps of Alex Albon from Monza in 2022 and needed to have his appendix removed, making way for 18-year-old Oliver Behrman to make his Formula 1 debut. I mean, man was starting on pole in the F2 feature race. Or was it the sprint race? I don't know. He was starting on pole for an F2 race. And then he gets the call up. He scored more points now in Formula 1 than he has in his F2 championship. And that is iconic. Man made his mark on F1. He got through to Q2 in qualifying, in P11, being knocked out of Q3 by 0.07 of a second by Lewis Hamilton, a 7-time world champion. Like, what? And he was mad about it too. And I love that. So Ollie ended the weekend in P10 in the Drivers' Championship. He now has more points than half the grid. He's on 6. He has more than Haas. Do we think Ollie's going to get a drive at Haas? And we're going to get a repeat of the whole Nick De Vries thing after he stepped in for Alex? 100%. 100%. But neglecting a third of their driver lineup this weekend. Chucky. He had a pretty decent weekend, qualifying on the front row once again and finishing with his first podium of the season and elevating himself to P3 in the championship. I mean, and again, Charles Leclerc, top 5 in every session across the weekend. So he beat Perez in free practice 3, free practice 2, free practice 3, and quali. So the potential is there for the Ferrari. But do I think it's gonna come out on top of a Red Bull at any point? Not unless it's a Singapore situation. But let's move on to McLaren, shall we? My favourite sentence of the entire weekend. Lando Norris leads the Saudi Arabian Grand Prix. It was the best and also the worst moment, because I also knew that it wouldn't last as much as I wanted it to. But was I delusional enough to believe that he could pull it off despite being a pit stop down? Absolutely. Did it matter that he had 2 Red Bulls and a Ferrari behind him? Absolutely not. Did it matter that those Red Bulls and the Ferrari were on fresher tyres? Absolutely not. There was a part of me that wholeheartedly believed he could pull it off. But nevertheless, after a little cry at 4 a.m, we move on. Practice was a bit of a mixed bag for both of them, both Lando and Oscar, with both dropping out of the top 10 at least once. And again, I'm going to put that down to run plan. But was I still concerned that they were dropping out of the top 10? Yeah, absolutely. Especially in free practice too, when it is the most indicative time to do your quali runs and your race runs, because it is the closest time across the entire 3 days, especially those 3 days, when it's the closest to quali and closest to race time. So the concern was real. But nevertheless, they both made it through to Q3 for the second week in a row. Significant improvement on their 2023 season. And OP out-qualified Lando once again in Saudi, and starting in P5 and P6 respectively, and both finished in the points on race day, with Oscar missing out on a podium by a very slim margin. And I say slim because without that 20-lap battle with Lewis, I fully believe he could have gotten Charles. But as he said himself, he is now a Mercedes rear wing expert. And he will have learnt so much from that battle with Lewis as well. So we keep moving, whatever it takes, remember? But on to Mercedes. They were consistent. Both drivers top 10 in every session. They were up there. But as I predicted, George is just still, he's more comfortable, more in tune with the car than Lewis, out-qualifying him once again. In fact, he was in front of Lewis in every session. Like every session. Make of that what you will. But the car is still very much off the pace with the likes of the McLaren, Ferrari and the Red Bull. And I mean, I thought the gap between the McLaren and the Mercedes might have been a bit closer in comparison to that of the Ferrari and the Red Bull. But those battles, the pace the McLaren was able to carry through in the high-speed corners was just, it was elevated so much more in comparison to that of the Mercedes. So there is still a lot of work to be done on that, on both cars. But I think the McLaren is just a little bit ahead of the Mercedes at this point. But hey, both Mercedes drivers finished in the points, even if they are nowhere near podiums at this stage. Do I think with an upgrade package they could have potential? Yeah, absolutely I do. But do I think that's now? No, I do not. Aston Martin. Another top 10 weekend for Fernando. 2 in a row. Every session in top 10. Lance, on the other hand, he was almost on for a top 10 weekend. So close. He was finishing in the top 10 in the first 4 sessions. And then he has to go and ruin it in the race when he put his car in the wall. And he claimed the title of the first person to crash in 2024. Not the first retirement, because that goes to Pierre Gasly, but the first crash. And because of that crash, Fernando was the only one to add to their little bank account of points. I mean, Fernando even topped free practice too. So the hope was there. And Lance improved so much in comparison to Bahrain. And he didn't even have broken wrists this time. But that DNF has cost him and the team dearly, because I think they were both probably on for a double points finish. So ultimately, they're staying in 5th place. They're in P5, and without some drastic changes, I don't see them making much progress upwards. I think the P5's where they're going to stay for the duration of the season. Especially if on weekends where they should be able to capitalize, they aren't, and they're not getting the points. But speaking of points, guess who is in the points? Haas. First point of the season in race 2. The first 4 sessions of the weekend were very, very on brand. Very typical of what you would expect from Haas. But thanks to K-Mag and his masterclass on how to hold up the grid, how to create a gap like it's nobody's business, they were able to get Hulk a top 10 finish, despite the fact he did not pit under the safety car. He held that pack up like it was his life goal. He went from I think it was like 4 maybe seconds gap between him and Hulk to 22. He backed everyone up so that way they could get in that pit stop and they wouldn't lose their P10. Is that teamwork or what? I mean, K-Mag did rack up some penalties in the process. Like a few incidents, a few cutting corners, a few left tracking advantages. But it is what it is. they scored points. They scored a single point. And they have done better than 4 other teams. So, props to them. The time that they have spent working on their race pace has clearly paid off. And I love that for them. But does this make K-Mag the new Ocon? Just with like throwing out penalties left, right and centre. Anyway, on to Williams. Honestly, I didn't have a lot to say about Williams. Because they were possibly the biggest victims of the K-Mag blockade of 2024. They missed out on points by a single position. And without that blockade, they would be in the points. I wholeheartedly believe that. But there were a lot of positives that came out of this weekend for the team. One of which being Logan's improvement. I mean, Jeddah is a track that he would be familiar with from his F2 days, and he raced there last year in F1, so it's, I mean, same with Bahrain. But the improvement is there. And he did make up 5 places across the span of the race. His qualifying wasn't great, being in P19, but he made up for it and got up to I think it was 13? P14. So there are positive signs. And without that blockade, I definitely think they would have been on for points. So fingers crossed, moving on to Australia, they'll get it. Steak kick, whatever, Sauber, whatever we're calling them. I honestly, Steak F1 team kick Sauber, I think is their official name. I have more to say about their name than I do about their performance. I'm far from impressed with what they've had to offer so far this season. And quite frankly, they're doing nothing to prove me wrong that they will continue to be backmarkers until Audi take over in 2026. Neither driver made it into the top 10 classifications at any point across the weekend. So do I think both drivers could possibly be without a seat come the end of the season? Yes, I do. Especially considering both of them finished in the top 5, in the bottom 5. And with 2 cars that DNF'd, that leaves only 3 places. And they took out 2 of them. Things within that team need to change, and they need to change quickly if they're going to try and salvage any remnant of their season. Do I think they can do what McLaren did last year? No. Do I think they could make some potential improvements? Yes. But P9 is going to be their max, and that's being generous. RB. V-carb, veggie carbonara. The internal beef didn't make an appearance this weekend, on screen at least. Do I think it's gone away completely? Probably not. They probably they're saving that for Netflix. But in all honesty, both drivers seem fairly evenly matched. Yuki was maybe slightly ahead of DR, given that he did make it through to Q3 for a P9 start to Danny's P14. But aside from that, in every session they were going back and forth trading places as to who was going to finish higher. So factoring all of that in, I do think that they are fairly evenly matched. But come race day, it is very apparent that Danny Rick was correct in telling us to temper our expectations during testing. Especially considering Yuki dropped 6 places to finish in P15, nowhere near the points, and Danny in P16 after qualifying P14. The race pace isn't there. And yes, mistakes from both of them contributed greatly to where they ended up finishing. I mean, Yuki defended in places he didn't really need to defend against the K-Mag blockade, and it cost him 2 places. Daniel had a spin on his own, not provoked or anything. So if they just drive, and because they are both great drivers, and if they just do what they are capable of doing, I think they'll be okay. But I do think the car is not what everyone thought it would be. It is not the RB19, because if it was, they would be dominating, like Max and Checo, not finishing, not fighting for P15 and 16. So let's see what they can bring in Australia. And then last but not least, let's talk Alpine. The bar could not be lower for them at this point. But a retirement on lap 1 due to mechanical issues that started on the formation lap is probably not what the team wanted. And I guarantee you, when Pierre moved from AlphaTauri to Alpine and endured a year of fighting with Esteban, retiring because of a gearbox issue on lap 1 is not where he envisioned his 2024 to be. Especially when he's fighting for a contract for next season. It's not what the team wanted, it's not what Pierre wanted, and it's not what either of them needed, but it is indicative of where they are at and their overall lack of development over the course of the 2023 season. It's almost a year on from that double DNF in Australia that set them back from all of their development across 2023, and they are still suffering the effects of it almost a year later. Neither driver has made a significant impact, and qualifying still showed that they are well and truly off the pace in comparison to where they were last year and those around them. And I mean, but there was improvement from last week. I mean, last week they qualified P19 and P20, but this week they qualified P17 and P18. Progress. On this trajectory, they should be where they were last year, around, I want to go Singapore, but, you know, things, they need to get it together, and they need to turn it around ASAP if they want to try and do what McLaren did last season, or if they don't, they will remain at the bottom of the constructors for the remainder of the season. And at this point, I haven't seen anything that tells me otherwise. I don't think that they, even with an upgrade package, I still think they're going to be bottom runners. I don't have any hope for Alpine, and I want them to prove me wrong. Thank you for watching. Thank you for listening. Thank you for being here. This has been another episode of Box, and I will catch you in my next episode where we are previewing the AusGP. And spoiler alert, I will be there. Thanks, guys.